Hello, and welcome to the National Archives Foundation's virtual program series. I'm Patrick Madden, the Executive Director of the Foundation. The Foundation is the nonprofit partner to the National Archives. Through this Foundation programming, we're pleased to kick open the doors of the more than 15 billion paper records, objects, films, letters, drawings, photographs, and most importantly, the stories from our nation's past. The National Archives Museum is open and bustling. We hope you will visit the National Archives Foundation to learn more about what's happening at the museum. And of course, these programs, we have a lot of things coming up this summer. In fact, right now you can go and click on that subscribe button on YouTube and make sure you're following us. Thank you for joining us from home today, another history-inspired conversation. Our guest speakers will be taking your questions. This is a live program, so please use the YouTube chat box to do that. You don't have to wait for the Q&A time to do that. You can do that at any time. I already saw a couple questions in there. And as always, put your hometown and state in there, and I'll give you a shout out later on. Tonight's conversation is about genealogy and the 1950 census. Our all-pro team speakers here are going to be talking about a range of their experiences, though, about finding relatives. So those questions, I know I can already see them filling up the chat box. I doubt you'll be able to stump them, but we'll see. Our first speaker is a familiar face and one of my bosses. Alelia Bundles is the co-author of On Her Own, A Life and Times of Madam C.J. Walker, a New York Times notable book about her entrepreneurial great-great-grandmother, was also the inspiration for Self-Made, a fictional 4-part Netflix series starring Octavia Spencer. She's the chair emerita of the board of the National Archives Foundation, vice chair emerita of Columbia University's Board of Trustees, a member of advisory boards for the March on Washington Film Festival and the Schlesinger Library on History of Women in America at Harvard's Radcliffe Institute. She is an Emmy Award-winning producer and news executive for 30 years at NBC News and ABC News. Alelia, welcome.
Patrick,
hello.
It's always good to be here. So it's also really fun and wonderful to be here again with Shaquan McDowell and Ray Cousins, who are just lots of fun, but also very knowledgeable. And I can't wait to hear about their discoveries. We've done a lot since we were together in March when we were talking about genealogy. But first, let me just give our viewers a little overview of why we're so excited. It's been 72 years since the 1950 census, and that is what the amount of time that the government requires before these records can be released. So these records were released on April 1st. The National Archives has digitized the 1950 census, which means that they are available for free online for people. People can see population schedules for US states and territories, enumeration district maps, and enumeration district descriptions on the dedicated website at 1950census.archives.gov. And there's a searchable name index. So many of you who are watching because you care about genealogy. I just learned the other day that genealogy is the second most popular hobby in America after gardening. So Ray, Shaquan, and I, like you and millions of Americans, are doing family research. We're fortunate to have access to the records at the National Archives, but I just want to give a little bit of a disclaimer. We are not members of the National Archives and Records Administration staff, though we love the folks who are there. But we are doing our own research, and it is really my pleasure to welcome Ray Cousins. Ray can turn on, and Shaquan McDowell. And they are really, they can, each of you should just talk about maybe a teeny bit about how you got interested in genealogy, and then we're going to go into some of the discoveries they've made. So Ray, would you start? How did you get on this train?
Hey everyone, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, good evening everyone. Super happy to be here. Hope everybody's having a good evening. Thank you very much, National Archives Foundation and Alelia, for having me. Yeah, genealogy is something I've been doing since I was 7 years old. My dad would have to do book reports, and question I would always ask them is, how does this connect to our family? So do a book report on Martin Luther King Jr. My grandfather was born the same year he was. So what was his experience alongside Martin Luther King doing what he did? And my dad thought that I was being a smart aleck until I got older and he saw that I was really serious about it. So yeah, it's in my DNA. I love it. I think it's been about 12 or 13 years since I went 2 days without touching any records or doing any research. So yeah, happy to be here. Happy to talk about it. This is the genealogy holiday.
Committed. Thank you. And Shaquan.
Absolutely.
Most definitely, most definitely. To echo Ray, it's just super excited to be here. So thank you, Alelia, National Archives Foundation as well. Similar to Ray, I've been doing genealogy since I was a kid. I'd say it really started when I was around 7, but I have been asking questions to my family about where we come from really all my life. I remember one of my earliest memories is me asking a question to my mom about our family in the area that we're from, and her giving me this whole rundown about it. And I think it's really because I've had the luxury of knowing my great-grandparents, my extended family, and I and my parents are from the same town that we've been in for the last 100 years. So it was just genuine drive to understand how we connected to it all, similar to what Ray said, and just understanding how our narrative and our story was a part of this larger community that we had been in for so long.
So I think this helps those of the folks who are in our audience understand that this is a deep love and affection that we all have. And it's just this opportunity to discover our families, how our families fit into history, how we fit into the overall narrative of American history. And having the 1950 census has opened up an entire new treasure trove. So Ray, I know you've made some interesting discoveries. Do you want to share a couple of things with us?
Yeah, I was super excited. The first thing I wanted to look for was my paternal grandmother, who I love dearly. And how I found her was just kind of doing the math, looking at the 1940 census, seeing what page she was on, seeing where she lived. A few years later, you had the World War II records where my family was, where the men in my family that lived at that same address was there. And then looking at city directory records. So the first thing I did was I think I waited until midnight. It took me like 10, 20 minutes to really get on the archive site. And it was literally the third page. It's my grandmother, her mother, my eldest uncle and aunt. And the surprise was my great-great-grandmother was 82 years old in the 1950 census, and she was there. She has a really common name, Louise Smith. So I don't know what exact year that she passed, but I probably give it about a 1940. Before the 1950 census came out, it was wide open. So I was looking between 40 and 60 max. It was 25, 30 Louise Smiths, and I wasn't going to buy all those death certificates to figure out which one. So once I saw she was in the 50, I could kind of limit it. So that was down to, I think, 10. I'm willing to pay that price to figure out what year she passed. So that's kind of like my Achilles heel in my research. So, I mean, it's already paid dividends.
That's fabulous. That's fabulous. Shaquan, tell us about something you discovered that was, a wow moment.
Oh, most definitely. So when I was looking at the 1950 census, this really was, April 1st was a holiday for me, like for sure. I remember literally 1940 census being released. And as a kid, I thought that was so cool. I had like my first access to like my first laptop. And so I was searching it all day. And I've really been waiting for this day since that release. So the first folks that I really wanted to find were really my great-grandparents, particularly my paternal grandparents. So my grandfather's parents, my great-grandfather, Joe and Cohen. His name was Joe Nathan Cohen. And I wanted to see what they were doing. I knew them very well when I was younger. My great-grandmother, his wife died in 2014, and he died when I was 5. So I really wanted to get to know him a little bit more and understand where he was coming from and what his life was like in the 1950s. What I found was, one, I revisited his World War II draft document and record. And what I found is, one, he was employed by the WPA project, which was one of the New Deal projects that were released during the FDR administration to combat the Great Depression. And so I was able to understand, one, how my family related to the Great Depression, and two, when learning or looking at that 1950s census document, I was able to see that by the 1950s, my great-grandfather did own a piece of land. And that was really enlightening to me, because in the previous censuses, his family did not own any land. And I know that up until he died, one of the great sense of pride of his was knowing that he was able to pass down land to his children, my grandfather and his siblings. And the other thing that I found was actually also about this same branch of my family, but it's about his in-laws, so my great-grandmother's parents, and that's my great-great-grandfather. You can see right now Joe Nathan Cohen's draft card, and that's what I was talking about, the WPA project. But you also saw the draft card of Willie Fuller, which was his father-in-law just a moment ago, and Willie Fuller was drafted into World War I. At the time that he was drafted, similar to Joe Nathan, he had no property. His family were coming right at the end of the 20th century. And so they were rebuilding after the end of the Reconstruction era had ended. By the 1950 census, Willie Fuller is a farmer working on his own account, and he is employing his family and local relatives on a dairy farm, which also is land that went on to be passed on to my family. And so I was able to see just from the 1900s to the 1950s, this transition and this upward mobility of my family as they lived in this intense era, battling for civil rights, returning from the 2 world wars and building their family as we entered into the 1950s. So those were really, really fun finds for me, and just super thrilled about the other ones I'll find with the 1950 census.
I think what I hear from both of you is creating a family narrative. And while we sort of may know the name, many people know the names of grandparents. Some people don't even really know the names of grandparents, but it's the connective threads that let you place this within the context of American history. Those WPA jobs are similar to the kinds of things that would happen with the Build Back Better bill, that people who have been struggling financially would get an opportunity. That really made a difference for a lot of families. That certainly was true in my father's family. My father was born in 1928, and he was the 7th of 9 children. Now, when I was starting to look, I told you guys that I was having trouble navigating the databases, and you were able to help me. So tell me, what I put in my dad's name, I thought he might be living with his sister. My grandparents, his parents, were living not too far away, but I couldn't find them. So tell me how you were able to find my family when you were navigating these NARA records, these scanned documents.
Yeah, I'm happy.
So this is, now I will say that just for people, this is the Vandever family, and my dad's sister, Dorothy Bundles, my father's name was Henry Bundles, his sister, Dorothy Bundles, married Everett Vandever. And I thought maybe he was, living with her around this time, because I wasn't born until 1952. So that's just to give some context for the Vandever family.
Yeah, most definitely. So I can jump in and then turn it over to Ray. I know that, you have a lot of tips for the 1950 census and finding this too. One of the things that I thought about first is that this is incredibly new. There are a lot of records that have been digitized, but they're still being indexed. And so the first thing that I did was play around with the digitized records on the National Archives website. I played around with the names that you had given me, Alelia, and truth be told, none of them came up. They were just not there at all. And so the second thing I did, and it's something that you had mentioned earlier and Ray had as well, was go to the enumeration district maps and really putting those names, all variations of those names, together into those NARA records, and really just start perusing every single name you see in conjunction with what names are listed right next to them. Some of the names were a little bit funky. They did not seem right to me. It didn't really match, but some of them were next to other names you had supplied. And so they all started to fit together. So I found the Venn diagram family at first. I found your family, and I noticed that your father wasn't living with them. And so I found the other family. But what I wanted to verify before I responded back to you was that this was who we thought they were. And so I did go back. I took the records that we had found, and I went back and I cross-checked them with the 1940 census to just verify all the information and make sure that it was solid. But it was really that combination of playing around with those different names and the combinations, seeing who they were living next to, and adding in those enumeration district maps that helped me find and locate where they were and what they were doing at that time.
So for people who aren't familiar with the enumeration district maps, what can give us a little explanation of that?
Yeah, most definitely. Ray, do you want to hop in and explain a little bit?
Sure. When the census takers, the enumeration district is, in the city, county area, they basically chop the locations up. And so they would group them together and then have a census taker canvass the area, get the names, who all lives there, addresses, all of that stuff. So it's important when you are looking, just like Shaquan said, when you're looking for your family in the 1950 census, if you can go back to the 1940 census, if your family was more stable and they weren't a part of that second wave of the Great Migration, chances are they're probably in the same area. So if you find them in the 1940 census, which is pretty much digitized everywhere, the top right corner is the enumeration number. It's one number dash and then another series of numbers. And what you could do if your family isn't digitized, so me and Shaquan did as well, as we went to the archives website. We put in that series of numbers that was in a 1940. And unless you live in New York City where it's like 300 pages, you're usually looking at 20 to 40 pages. And just take your time and go through every single page. And, if they're not on that exact page, because, houses, situations change, they should be in that grouping. Or you can go back a series number or forward a series number. And I would say 8 times out of 10, we found what we were looking for.
Well, and that's helpful. That I think that gives people a perspective. Like, yes, New York is, massive, but other places it's much more manageable to just scroll through things, and then you make those discoveries. And then, of course, on the NARA website, there are tutorials and other kinds of things that explain the census and how it was scanned and the enumeration districts, and with lots of tips on how to do the search. But you all helped me a lot because I just really was hitting a brick wall. And now I know part of it is that you just have to be persistent and you have to stay in there. So before we go into our next section, is there anything else that you want to say just about searching the 1950 census, or any advice that you have for people as they're starting to delve into it?
Before I start, I just wanted to say shout out to all the historical societies out there. Shout out to the genealogy groups and organizations, and all the way down to the group of friends who are having Zoom calls and having census transcribing parties and stuff like that, because you guys are the force behind getting this out and making it easy for the average person to search and find their family. So you have these systems out that could transcribe stuff pretty easy, and they're great, but nothing beats the pen and the paper and eyes looking at it and transcribing it appropriately. So shout out to all of you guys.
Thank you so much for doing that. And Ray, we've all been benefited from our friends and, family members. I have some family members who are much better at DNA research than I am, who've done other branches of my family, and all of us working together really do create this larger picture. So we're going to go to questions shortly, but before we do that, I know that you all have found some specific documents that, help create context beyond just a family story. So I want to talk about that a bit.
Sure.
All right. So I think that Val is going to put up a document. And we'll go past my family document there. Well, actually, I'll just mention this since it's there. But among the things that I discovered that had nothing to do with the 1950 census, but that was new, and it's the kind of oral history that we all talk about with families will say things and you don't quite know, is that really true? Some of it's true, some of it's not true. But in this case, this is my great-great-grandfather, my father's great-grandfather, whose name was Thornton Davis. And I didn't know him, but his name had been mentioned just kind of in passing. He lived in Kentucky, and some people would say, oh, he was a big man. Well, I didn't know exactly what that meant. Well, just recently I discovered that he was in the United States colored troops. He had been in Kentucky. He was born in Virginia. He was living in Kentucky as an enslaved person, and then he fought in the Civil War, and he was in Richmond, Virginia, when the surrender happened. So you were always discovering new things, and there is actually a transcript of an oral history. So that's my other discovery. So then we'll go to the next slide. And this is the Will Turpin letter. So Shaquan.
Yeah, absolutely. So this letter is actually not specifically of my ancestor, but someone who was a close contemporary of my ancestor at the time. I'm a South Carolina researcher. I always say upper part of the lower South, lower part of the upper South, a region that really is under discussed, I think, in a lot of parts of other parts of American history. And so whenever I find anything that relates to the broader part of American history, I think it's broadly or extremely compelling. And this is a letter from Will Turpin in 1825 to Thomas Jefferson. Will Turpin was a part of a duo. He was a Revolutionary War patriot who would go on to set all of his people he enslaved free upon his death, as did his partner, Thomas Wadsworth. In 1825, Will Turpin is seen penning a letter to Thomas Jefferson, who would have been about 10 years or 20 years outside of the presidency at this time, discussing the need to end slavery and discussing the need for emancipation. The reason I think that this letter isn't really important is because that individuals that he freed were relatives of mine in the Upper Carolinas. So my lineage does go back and directly relate to the people who were freed by William Turpin. But I also think it reminds us that this conversation regarding slavery is much broader than the Civil War, and the status of folks of color, Black people, and other people inside of American history have always been here, and they've always been a part of this narrative from the top to the bottom. And so reading this letter, I just thought it was really interesting to see that in 1825, this conversation was being had with someone who was a founding father of the United States. And Thomas Jefferson would later go on to correspond with Turpin's nephew, Samuel Maverick, who is the reason we have the word Maverick in the English language. And so finding these little nuggets and understanding that my family and other families, even though their name may not be on an explicit document, were a part of this conversation, were a part of all these events, is always really compelling and interesting to me.
Well, and it's interesting. Of course, people say that, someone was a man of his times, or, that was the sort of the common wisdom. But this is a challenge to that there were always people who were thinking more progressively, who were seeing a different way of approaching the world. So and we're fortunate now, so much is online that we don't have to wait for the history textbooks, which leave out these key things. We can find it on our own. So Ray, did you also have a document? I don't know if Val had another thing to put up for us.
I don't think so. I think I forgot to send it to you guys. But
all right, but no, hey, listen, know what? The good news for me, the time is really going really quickly. And so we're ready for questions, and Patrick is going to give us some questions. But it just says to me, there's so much for us to talk about that I'm really looking forward to our next session. And we haven't even finished this session. So Patrick, I think, is going to come back on and give us some questions. Hey.
Yes, get those questions coming in. I have a few to warm us up. I want to welcome folks from all over the country. It's great to have such a good audience. We've got Tampa, Riverview, Florida, the DC metro area is well represented, Pittsburgh, Memphis, Middle Georgia, Myrtle Beach, Dallas and Houston, Arizona, Edmonds, Washington, Southern California, Northern California, Philly, Brooklyn, Mount Morris, New York, Arkansas, Wisconsin, not to be confused with Arkansas, the state, Delaware, Minneapolis, Las Vegas, Milwaukee. We've got a range of folks, so it's terrific to have you with us, and thank you. So send in those questions. So I've got one that came in early. I have to ask it first because they actually asked the question before we even started the program. So bravo to you. So this is a question about the Friedman's Bureau records, record group 105. What is the quickest or best way to access those records?
Yeah, absolutely. So the easiest way to access them, there are tons of ways you can do it digitally, but you can access them directly through the archives by going to catalog.archives.gov. Record group 105 was in the Mississippi area, but there you can pull all of the documents that were text documents up, register of patients, the weekly reports, letters sent and orders received, everything of that sort. So all you got to do is go to catalog.archives.gov, search for record group 105, and that'll bring all of those things up for you.
Terrific, thank you. I'm going to ask a one-on-one question because this was my first census where I was going online. I told this in a story in a previous program. I went and found my grandparents and my mother and her sisters and brother and so forth. But I heard a lot of people are running into their first time, looking up. It says not home, and they sort of give up, but they shouldn't give up. And so, can you guys explain why they shouldn't give up?
Yeah, it may not. Well, this is a tough one because I actually had that happen with my maternal grandparents where they weren't home at the residence, but my trick with genealogy is going sideways. So you can always look at their siblings, their parents, aunts, uncles, and so my grandfather was in the census actually twice. He had one. He was enumerated living with his father, and he was enumerated a second time living with my grandmother. So just thinking outside the box, looking at different things. They may have been at their sister's house or brother's house or aunt or uncle, and the census taker knocked on the door and who's all in the house. And next thing you know, you think, oh, they're not home and they're not in the census, but they're across town because that's where they were when the census was taken. So just continue to think outside the box, go sideways, diagonally. Just don't go straight down the street. You can take a shortcut in the alley and you may find it.
Most definitely.
I was also told that in some of the records, if you go further in those files, they come back around to the houses and they might be listed later. So you might have hit it the first time, but it's also later on. So like you say, stick with it. Don't give up, Alilia.
Well, and is there, we were at an event at the archives a couple of weeks ago, and I was mentioning my frustration, and I think someone said that a lot of times on page 70 is the group of people who weren't at home. Is that correct information? I don't want to give incorrect information.
It was a specific, I remember that. It was a specific page, and it gets consistent for some reason across all the records.
Right.
So.
Page 70 is really always a good place to check. I always say, like, the census is a product of enumerators, which are people who do people things, and they always make their own people notes. So you always, if they say not home, you just really want to read the record and see if they make any other note and see where they're pointing you to. I had this happen last night. They said not home, and it was not page 70. This one was on page 112. In Spartanburg, South Carolina, and in there they were re-enumerated. So just want to pay attention to those notes because individual folks are writing individual things, but you always usually can track it down and where it's at.
Well,
And
and that is, it's so true. As I was looking at something today, my mother's uncle, his name was misspelled. His name is Henderson Turner Perry. And the census had him as Genderson with a G, or maybe that was just the way that the scan read it. But I think, anybody who's done research in these records knows that, as you say, they're human beings who are doing it. Some of them are better at handwriting than others. Some of them are more conscientious. These were patronage jobs a lot of times. So you didn't always get the most competent person, though most of the time you did. And it's interesting, as you know, names are misspelled, unusual names are misspelled, and also one's race is sometimes incorrect. And especially with Black families where there's a range of skin color, if a census taker saw someone who was very light skinned, they might not ask them their race. They might assume that they were white, and they might not really be white. So that we get all kinds of things where you use the census as a starting point, and it's a pretty good starting point. It's a great foundation, but you're right. You do have to keep digging a little further.
Yeah. Sometimes the enumerators may not be from that area, so they don't have a good lay of the land, or cultural differences. Or like in my instance, I remember when I first started out, my grandfather's name is Fury Lee Cousins Jr. So I'm looking for Fury everywhere. Every record, could not find him. And then I searched Lee Cousins, which is his middle and last name, and they popped up. And Lee Cousins Sr. and Jr. on every record. So they may have a given name, but they may go by a nickname. And in my family, a lot of times they went by their middle and last name. So, yeah.
Okay, we got another question here about, it says, when can I access Civil War pension files? They're accessible, but do folks want to talk about any advice for folks thinking about pension files?
Yeah, so I'm sorry, did they say when by chance?
They did say when, yes.
Okay. So I think that you should be able to access Civil War, almost everyone should be able to access a Civil War pension record to date. Just like the archives, there usually are limitations for personal records, but those are all, many of them are digitized. You can find them in various digital areas across the web. Fold 3 is a good resource to use. The archives also has these on their website as well. So again, that catalog.archives.gov link is really a great place to start if you want any National Archives records or things that are stored in the National Archives. And so that should still be available if you do go ahead and search in that catalog. But if you did want a straightforward avenue or a tailored military source that deals with records, then Fold 3 is also a resource that's available across the web as well.
Yeah, I mean, for Civil War, Revolutionary War, World War I, and World War II draft registration, there are lots of records that are just really out there. So it's not, so those are really available. That sort of discovery that I made with Thornton Davis, my great-great-grandfather, was just random. I was, one day I was on Ancestry and I was, updating or following the leaves, and that popped up. And then I just Googled him and found this oral history. I mean, one of the interesting things, because people are so passionate about Civil War history, is that there are lots of places that really are trying to find the life stories of people and people who were recorded. And you think you're never going to find anything, but more than 100 years ago, there was somebody who interviewed this great-great-grandfather of mine who was not a famous person, but he had been in the war. That made him, important in his community.
That's great. And I just realized we should give the website so folks might want to tool around, because I know some folks have struggled on the archives website, and this is a special website just for the 1950 census. So it's 1950census.archives.gov. And I was very fortunate when I first jumped on. It was a matter of probably less than 10 minutes. I did find a misspelled last name, but it was close enough that I knew I should click on it and look at it. And sure enough, there were my grandparents. What about finding military members, families living overseas? Any advice on that?
What era would they be looking?
So they're saying in Japan, 1950, coming from the 1950 census.
That's a good one. I would say the same, kind of like the same thing Shaquan said. You got full 3. There are a lot of muster reports, but as far as families, it's National Archives. That's a tough one. You got me stuck. What do you think, Shaquan?
So I want to say, and I can't say specifically, but I do believe that if we're talking about folks who are American citizens overseas, and talking about the 1950 census, I do believe that they're still going to be enumerated. I'm just trying to figure out how to find exactly where they are. But my guess would still be you should still be able to find them in the census records if you are searching. But I'm trying to get a more specific answer as to where they would be.
I'm asking this question, but because there are records of people of arrivals and departures on ships, I don't know that would apply to military families, but it's maybe one way to think about finding something.
Yeah, that is definitely one of those good ones.
So we'll have an answer when we do our next show.
Yeah.
That'll give us something more.
The work is ongoing.
Well, it brings up an interesting point. So someone asked about History Hub. So if you go to the bottom of the archives, it's on the archives.gov page, but the census page that says connect with us through History Hub. I don't know if you all have used that as a resource, but I have heard that it's a tremendous resource because there's lots of questions that are coming in the archive staff with other folks who are doing this work at sort of, peer-to-peer advice and counsel on it. Of course, the archive staff itself, you can email the archives and their researchers or archivists will help you, basically consult with you on how to get started on these things. So this kind of question that stumped our master panel here. The archive staff would be jumping on it. But History Hub, have you all been in there, asked questions, had questions answered? Any experience you might want to share about that?
Yeah, I've been in there, and I'll say, ask your questions because folks still can learn from your questions, even if you don't want to ask a question, or if you don't want to ask a question and you want to find information. History Hub is still a good place to peruse and see what has already been asked. It is sorted by like different record, what you're looking for. So there is one community, or that's what they call it, communities. There's one community that's currently focused on like the 1950 census. There's one that I know is on naturalization and immigration. So that may be a relevant one there as well. And again, yeah, you can still also, you're able to connect with folks who actually are at the National Archives and are actual archivists, and other folks who are just familiar with utilizing the archives as a resource overall. So if you do have very specific, topic driven questions, or you think it does fall within the communities, or you're looking for communities who are looking for your things in the archives, then I say jump into it. I'm a big advocate for anything that allows community to come together. As Ray was saying earlier, it's really community that drives this and makes it happen. And History Hub is a great way to blend, that actual archives help and the help of actual archivists with also, also blending that community feel and driven focus as well.
And they do have a topic centered around military records. So I think that'd be a good route for you to figure that out rather quickly.
Yeah, it's a great site. I just started looking at it. And there's a lot there. Yet another rabbit hole, which is part of the fun of all of this. Today, I was looking at some records of filling in some things on a family tree on Ancestry, and I really had a lot of other work that I needed to be doing. But an hour later.
And as you can imagine, we have some very active genealogist in the chat, and so I can give a couple pieces of information. One person suggests the Form P5 for Overseas Census Report, and another person said that service members in Japan were counted as statistics, but their information wasn't transferred to the main site because the forms weren't kept. So might be a dead end, but I still challenge you to email the archive staff because they'll be able to give you the full scoop if they exist or don't exist, or if there's a way there. So we've had a couple questions, and you all have mentioned Fold 3, mentioned obviously Ancestry. And someone asked, well, there seems to be a paywall on Fold 3. I mean, some of these are membership organizations. So I can't say at the archives, if you come to an archives facility, there's 44 around the country, you can go into the research rooms and use ancestry.com for free. Now, the 1950 census is available on the archives website for free, as a government, obviously, entity. But can you just maybe, you all talk about your experiences on ancestry.com, Fold 3, are they all pay to play? Someone suggested maybe you can go to your local library and get on Fold 3. And I'm not trying to get people around membership rules and all that stuff, but are there differences in what's in these different resources that just on a top level that might be helpful for folks to understand?
Yeah, so with dealing with pay sites like Fold 3, Ancestry, like your local library, National Archives, Library of Virginia, just different records places will have that for free where you can go in and search. And also, it's a great way to navigate it is if you're a student looking for specific discounts and sales to kind of get in and out. If you do not have the funds to pay for it, but everything you really need is to own a National Archives site or Family Search for free. Like I said earlier, you have amazing genealogists, organizations, and communities pounding the pavement to hand digitize all of these records. So it won't be soon before long where all of this stuff is going to be available for free. But Ancestry, their technology has computer digitized, I think, virtually all of the records. So it has been helpful for me because my ancestors in the 30, 40, and 50 census lived in 3 different states. So they were difficult to track down. Ancestry helped, especially with their computer digitization. But a lot of, since it's a computer, a lot of names are off and, gotta kind of have to eyeball it, and sometimes a letter or a whole last name, because it's a computer, it's not a person. So you end up making the correction anyway. So
right, and you can edit that.
Yeah, I've edited a few, so it's like, okay, this was great, but I still have to work for it.
Yeah, I echo that. I'm really, honestly, when I was younger, for years, my mom was like not paying for Ancestry. So I found many ways to find or access the digital physical records or the actual ones. And as we were saying, most of the records are free. These are old documents. If you really want to find them, you can find them. Check the archives website. I think it gets, some people aren't as familiar. They hear Ancestry and they go there immediately, but the archives is essentially the home of many of these documents you're finding. And so check there first, because a lot of time, just like, that like the field group number or the records or those Friedman Bureau records, those are all for free on the archives website. Check and see what you can find there first if you're looking for something. And if you cannot find it there, then explore those other avenues. But it's not always pay to play. You can many times find what you're looking for without paying anything. So various ways to find the records, many ways out there.
And I would just add to that, when I did find that Thornton Davis United States Colored Troops record, I just Googled him and found something on a website about Black Virginians who had been in the Civil War. So there are lots of other databases that aren't necessarily the pay to play. I mean, and if you do decide to do one of the pay to play, it's helpful sometimes to look through some of the newspaper databases. I mean, we'll talk about that on our next gathering together, but it's stunning what you can actually find. Maybe we can help people sort of, if you think my family member is not famous, therefore they're not going to be in the newspaper, and many times they are. So maybe we can give people some tips on that.
For sure. I would say my biggest thing, especially with pay-to-play sites like your MyHeritage, Ancestry, Fold3, Genealogy Bank, whatever it have you, if you don't want to pay for it, and like I said, I don't want to go into a workaround, but there are free trials. Set your research plan, stick to it, stay in those tight windows, and you can get everything that you're looking for within the 5 to 7 days.
But you didn't hear that here.
No, but listen, and you're hooked if you do you want to know more. They know that. It's like that's why there's a trial.
Not gonna stop.
This is why they're good at marketing. Exactly.
Right.
Not to humble brag, but I believe like 80% or more on Ancestry.com what is sourced from the archives.
That's right.
So you might again take a stab at the archive site. So a couple of questions have come in here before. I know we're running out of time here a little bit. Here's an easy one, hopefully, for somebody to answer. How easy is it to find a person if you don't know the enumeration district they lived in?
Like I said before, a lot of Ancestry, also on Family Search, archives, a lot of files are being digitized. So if you don't actually know the enumeration district, they have a district finder search bar. So if you know the address or the area, you can Google Maps, find the address, put it in, and just go through every page of that enumeration page grouping, and that may be a good way to find them.
Okay. And then I got a Virginia specific question. One of our viewers was told that the town of Accomack, hopefully I'm saying that right, completed the census after the emancipation. Is anybody familiar with that? And if so, what year and where might it be housed? Accomack, Virginia, which I don't know that town, but I'm assuming the Virginia, maybe the Virginia Historical Museum, state records there, or?
Well, Virginia is really, I mean, of the various states, Virginia and North Carolina are probably some of the states that have the best historical records.
Absolutely. And the Library of Virginia is absolutely amazing. Yeah, it's stunning. So if you haven't visited there and utilized their resources, please do, because it's, yeah.
And are we, I guess, like we're referring to the 1860 census, or like they saying after emancipation?
After emancipation. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I would start with the Virginia archives. They have like everything for Virginia, very heavy paper trail, and go from there. If it's something really county or local area specific, then you probably do want to start with those local area archives and start looking through those first to get your answers.
Right. You're right. That 1870 census is when people first begin to find names of ancestors who were enslaved. So it's still, it's 5 years after the war. So people are, that was when there wouldn't have been a census, I don't think. And, in 1865, it really would have been 5 years later.
Yeah. Those local areas like circuit courts, a lot of counties of Virginia have historical societies. The circuit courts may have all of the records. You can maybe call. They may have somebody at the circuit court or historical society that could give you a hand in pulling those records. So you may have property records, marriage records, just different ways that you can navigate around and find what you're looking for.
Great. Well, we're at the time where we need to wrap up. So I'd love to give you guys just a quick speed round. Any last thoughts? We will be continuing to talk about genealogy here at the Archives Foundation. Of course, the National Archives has a whole series, if you're not familiar, of public programs, virtual programs that are available online for those who want to explore more about the 1950 census. But Why don't, if each of you like to say a last bits of advice?
Yeah, most definitely. Just really my first bit of advice is if you have time to volunteer to index and read names and put them in an index, do that. It's very important, and it helps us all in the long run. And two, really just if you're interested in genealogy or you're starting out or like you're really later down the line, we are in an era where we have access to more records at our fingertips whenever we want them than ever. So if you cannot find it, someone can find it. It is somewhere. Someone once told me, if your ancestor existed, there is likely a record that existed with them. So just keep searching. It may not be the easiest, but usually you can find what you're looking for. So.
Yeah.
So Ray, I know you have something profound to say, so I'm gonna let you end. But I would just say, one of the things that I found is just reading books and articles about the era, about the towns, about what life would have been like where your ancestor lived. And that can help you connect some dots that would be surprising to you. So they're not just a name on the census record. They are people who lived in a community, in a town, in a state, who did things in those places.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And echo both of what you guys were saying. Research the area, the history of the area, and also volunteer to transcribe some records. They'll be available for free for somebody else. It doesn't take long. You can do a page or two at a time. You can log on, do a page, get off. Or if you have time, look into your local historical societies, family search centers, archives, clubs. I'm big into the genealogy space and Clubhouse. So, it's a lot of people on there giving it up for free. And also just look at things, try to look at things from different perspectives. So a lot of us go straight up, like my dad, grandparents, great grandparents, try to look at the cousins and the siblings and aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, because sometimes you may not be able to go straight up, but if you find that grandfather's brother, he may have a perfect layout of all his records and indexed and everything, and it can shoot you straight up. So yeah, just stay flexible and happy hunting.
Well, thank you, Alelia, Ray, Shaquan. This has been, it's obviously great to hear you guys again. You did a great job. Twitter space conversation a couple months ago, and now people are really amped up with the 1950 census. So I appreciate you getting our audience energized, and stay tuned. We'll get another one on the books here and see what else, other advice you can give, other angles and directions you can send people to make sure they keep digging and finding. I know you guys are going to sign off. We got a couple things to close out, a few announcements. First, I want to give that that website again you see on the screen, 1950census.archives.gov. Is the jumping off point for the 1950 census. You can jump on the first button right there, begin search, and it's pretty straightforward. So give it a shot. And somebody asked in the chat about the archives. The archives is open. The research rooms are back open. They are by appointment only now. If you're familiar with the archives research before, it was first come, first serve. So you do need to contact if you're going to come in and do research in the research rooms. And part of that, making those appointments, that gets you in touch with the research archivist, and they'll help guide you along your path of research and sort of help you figure out the right buckets of record groups you might be looking for. So use that resource. They are there for free to the American public. Special thanks to our generous members, corporate supporters, and donors. If you'd like to become a member of the foundation, you can join today by visiting our website, archivesfoundation.org. And of course, I want to thank our foundation staff who make these programs happen, our gurus, Val McVeigh and Liana Askeles. Thank you. Follow us on social media, Archives Foundation, Archives FDN. I do that every time, at Archives FDN, or visit our website, sign up for weekly emails. We've got a great program coming up. June 21st is our contribution to the 50th anniversary of Title IX. So please tune in for that, RSVP for that, so you get the announcements and updates on that. And of course, there's only one thing more exciting than genealogy, that's shopping at the National Archives store. And here you can see some of we've got a nice collection now of Madam C.J. Walker gear. Visit us at nationalarchivesstore.org. to get your shopping groove on. The National Archives is our nation's memory. What is past is prologue. Until next time, on behalf of the National Archives Foundation, thank you for joining us today.